So we finally meet.
Capcom finally gave us a meatier look at the upcoming Resident Evil 8, one of the most anticipated games of the year, including for myself. I've been keenly interested in the game ever since it came to light that it was so heavily inspired by Resident Evil 4, and contains more supernatural elements that aren't zombies, like vampires, werewolves, etc. We received short glimpses of gameplay here and there, but on January 21st we got a real, direct look at combat, characters, and setting. So, without any more waiting, let's talk about it. The showcase opened up with a new story trailer giving us more of a glimpse into the narrative, including characters and setting. We see Mia and a little peek of her and Ethan's home life after the events of Resident Evil 7, and one of the game's antagonists, Lady Dimitrescu, aka Tall Vampire Lady, talking on the phone with someone named Mother Miranda. She name drops Ethan and someone else named Heisenberg, and mentions a ceremony, probably something in relation to the various cult-like imagery we've seen in other game footage. Then we're taken to Ethan's point of view in gameplay, in a dark basement facing off against a group of enemies, some of which seem to be wielding swords. Then we see some incredible environmental shots, some glimpses of Lady Dimitrescu's apparent daughters, and a shot of Chris taking away Ethan and Mia's baby, before closing with a brief conversation between Ethan and a currently unnamed character in sunglasses wielding a big-ass hammer, likely the aforementioned Heisenberg. I think the most likely things to be parsed from this new trailer is that Heisenberg is probably the villain of the first act, and Lady Dimitrescu is the villain in the second act. The most telling clues is the fact that Heisenberg wields that massive hammer which has been seen in the hands of an enemy we've witnessed in previous trailers, specifically in the village portion of the game, which is the opening act. Plus, in the phone call conversation with Mother Miranda, Dimitrescu mentions Ethan escaping from Heisenberg specifically. Anyways, Peter Fabiano shows up to confirm that the game will be coming to last-gen consoles with an option for free upgrades. He also reveals the release date of May 7th and then gives us a more direct look at gameplay. He confirms that the game does indeed progress from the village to the castle, mimicking the structure of Resident Evil 4. He also states that Ethan's goal is to find his kidnapped daughter, who was seen being taken by Chris earlier, which begs the question of whether Chris is cooperating with these people, or if the child was in turn taken from him too. We get more shots of the game's amazingly detailed environments, and then Lady Dimitrescu's daughters show up, looking just as creepily attractive as their mother, and drag Ethan to meet the lady herself. She mentions him escaping her little brother, which I assume refers to Heisenberg. After that, we finally get a look at combat, and it looks like a first-person Resident Evil game, complete with guarding and pushing enemies away. It cuts to outdoor footage, this time featuring that huge enemy with a massive hammer I mentioned earlier. I think it's safe to assume this is Heisenberg's monster form, and we receive confirmation of the existence of the famous red barrels. Then, much to my pleasure, we get to see some goddamn attaché case action. I have an irrational love for Resident Evil 4's attaché case. It's the only game where I actively enjoy rummaging through and organizing my inventory, and I'm glad it's back. And they brought back crafting as well. We also get a sample of weapon animations, which also seem to be as detailed as RE4's. After that, we're finally introduced to the game's merchant, the Duke, a massive man who offers supplies, ammo, and weapon upgrades, and also buys things you no longer want. Then we get a supercut of vases, boxes, and cabinets being destroyed for loot, confirmation of collectibles and puzzles, and a nasty little sequence of a bug burrowing into Ethan's hand, which seems to be a warning that one of Dimitrescu's daughters is around. After that gameplay dive, we get a surprise shadow drop, a PS5 exclusive visual demo titled Maiden. I played it, and I'll discuss my experience and thoughts later in the video. Peter also mentions another demo coming in spring on multiple platforms. Now with Resident Evil 8 content out of the way, another producer, Tsuyoshi Kanda, appears to talk to us about the context of the closed beta test that opened for registration a few days ago. He talks about key art that was released back in September, and now we get a glimpse of the context behind it, a multiplayer game called RE4. which pits multiple players controlling series characters in a sort of deathmatch competition. Also, in an interesting choice for aesthetics, the game adopts a very mild, cel-shading, comic book halftone filter over everything. Additionally, it seems that players who are killed also transform into villainous monsters like Tyrant and Nemesis. I have some thoughts about this, but I'll get into it in a minute. For now, we'll continue going over the showcase. Later, animation producer Hiroyuki Kobayashi shows up to talk about the 3D animated film Infinite Darkness, which was announced last year for Netflix. It was revealed to star Leon and Claire, but not much info was given beyond that. Unfortunately, he doesn't add much to enlighten us, simply stating that the movie takes place a few years after Resident Evil 4. And with that, the showcase is over. Short and sweet, only about 17 minutes. But it left a pretty positive impression, especially on Resident Evil 8. I'm extremely interested in the game, particularly because it seems to be such a love letter to Resident Evil 4, in style, structure, characters, and even inventory management. Story-wise, I definitely want to see where all of this supernatural stuff goes. Resident Evil has been about zombies, parasites, and fungus people for a while now, so this werewolf and vampire shit has me pretty invested. And I want to see what kind of part Chris is going to play. Village looks awesome, the graphics look stunning, the RE engine is an impressive piece of software, the characters look unique and cool, and the atmosphere seems totally on point. I'm very eager for it. Next, however, is the conversation about the multiplayer game Reverse, and to put it bluntly, it looks questionable at best. It looks even more like a throwaway effort than Resistance ever did, and it sort of makes me wonder about the context behind these multiplayer experiments. There have been several strange, if not downright terrible, attempts at bringing a multiplayer aspect to this franchise, and it seems like Capcom has resorted to just throwing shit at the wall to see what sticks. I think the fact that they're now packaged with a main series game is probably indicative of them trying to find something that works and draws in a consistently active player base. But honestly, they don't need to do any kind of weird experimental random stuff to accomplish this. There are plenty of ways for the RE formula to become a successful multiplayer experience, but Capcom seems to ignore the obvious ones. For example, if they wanted to make a Resident Evil Battle Royale, all they would need to do is drop 30 or so players in a reworked and slightly expanded Raccoon City map from the beginning of Resident Evil 3 and make it so that NPC zombies are the primary threat, as opposed to other players. Alternatively, if they want to steer away from PvP, they can easily make a co-op survival game where a team of 4 to 8 players have to stay alive in the RPD station as enemies try to break in. Players can board up windows, set traps, build barriers, and create choke points. And the more time that passes, the stronger the enemies become. Or they could go all the way and remake Resident Evil Outbreak. I always found those games to be fantastic ideas that simply came out a few years too early. 4 players teaming up for short, objective-based campaigns, choosing from a unique cast of characters with their own strengths and weaknesses could be great, and a PvP aspect wouldn't even be necessary, though it could be possible to add one. Allowing for a ton of customizable options to make each run different and unique would also be awesome. The only issue would be post-launch support. If Capcom wants these multiplayer games to succeed, they need to put the work in for regular content updates and patches. The potential is there, but it seems like Capcom is ignoring the routes that are either the most obvious or require the most work. I don't know about you, but I would definitely play a remake of Outbreak, or at least that co-op survival idea I mentioned earlier. But this Reverse thing, it did not give a good first impression. Matter of fact, it looks like a mobile game. Definitely not interested in this. Honestly, if I knew this was what the beta I signed up for was about, I wouldn't have signed up for it at all. And this leads me to the final thing about the showcase, the Maiden visual demo. I downloaded this as soon as I could, and for those who haven't picked it up yet, it's a non-combat vertical slice of the game where you play as a character who isn't Ethan. There's some minor puzzle solving and exploration, but there aren't any enemies to fight. In fact, as Peter Fabiano said in the showcase, you can't even guard, not that you need to. It's a short demo that can be completed in under 20 minutes, but despite the lack of features and its length, it left a very good impression on me. The most noticeable thing that stood out at first was how gorgeous the demo is. When I saw that Quixel Megascan logo when the demo started up, I knew I was in for some beautiful assets, and I was right. The detail in the environment is just amazing. There's one bedroom in particular that has intricate accents and molding all over the walls, and it's just beautiful. The RE engine is seriously a piece of work. Capcom is going to use this engine for many years to come, and they'll be better for it. I didn't notice any performance dips either. And while the demo had no combat, and thus mostly no enemies, the tense atmosphere still came through. I knew I wouldn't run into anything threatening if I couldn't even guard, but I still found myself paranoid regardless, peeking around corners and looking over my shoulder every once in a while. As a visual demo, it succeeds at its purpose, giving us a taste of how Resident Evil 8 will look and feel, and proudly showing off how awe-striking it looks. I look forward to the next demo they'll be releasing later in spring, which I'm sure will feature combat this time around, and probably take place in the village portion of the game. So that's pretty much everything regarding the Resident Evil showcase. I'm definitely looking forward to the game as well as the future of RE as a whole. I would have said that I expect information on Resident Evil 4 Remake not long after 8 launches, but while I was finishing up this video, some news came to light about RE4 Remake's development. According to Video Games Chronicle, M2's participation in the project was significantly reduced because they wanted to not change things about the game due to the backlash towards Resident Evil 3. But apparently Capcom is the one who does want changes, and thus they reduced M2's involvement in the project. And Capcom Division 1 now more or less controls it. This is interesting to say the least. You would think that the situation would be the other way around, but I guess Capcom has a very specific vision they want for this remake, and I can only guess as to what it could be. For those who aren't already aware, Capcom Division 1 is directly in charge of Resident Evil and Devil May Cry. Basically, they're a large portion of Capcom's heavy hitters. And considering their most recent games are some of the best that Capcom has put out in the last several years, I'm not exactly worried about this new development in RE4's direction. But it still begs the question of what kind of changes Capcom wants. The optimist in me thinks they'll actually reel back on the action of the original game and make it closer in pacing to Resident Evil 2. I can't compare to 8 because it's not out yet, but maybe there will be some similarities there as well. After all, no matter how you look at it, Village looks like a spiritual successor to 4. Even if 4 didn't get a remake, Village would kind of practically be one, so maybe we'll know Capcom's intended direction with 4 once we play 8. Of course, the pessimist in me thinks they'll ramp up the action and will sadly go in the same direction that we went a decade ago with the series brazenly throwing away its horror elements and turning into Michael Bay movies. But I don't think they would overhaul the franchise's image just to repeat that. Hopefully. Funnily enough, the report at Video Games Chronicle says Capcom doesn't want to be constrained to the blueprint of the original RE4, which is similar to what Shinji Mikami and Hiroyuki Kobayashi said about the old Resident Evil formula when making the original RE4. Funny how things come full circle like this. Honestly, RE4 has been ported to so many platforms and is so widely available to this day, I think keeping the remake a one-to-one experience is a bit of a waste. They have the opportunity to try new things, so I'm glad to hear they're taking it. It could end up lackluster like with 3, but 3's biggest problem isn't the changes in and of themselves. It's the fact that the remake removed more content from the original than it added. So it just felt like a lesser experience. And I say this as someone who honestly didn't even hate the game. In fact, I quite liked it, but as a remake, it disappointed, especially when it followed up one of the best games and remakes in the series, Resident Evil 2. Anyway, this concludes my thoughts on new Resident Evil news. There's a lot going on behind the scenes. A lot of it promising, some of it worrying. But I think that's been par for the course when it comes to this franchise for a while now. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you around.